Yeah, even got our own song now. Welcome to Late Night with Lancey. This is a stream I do most Thursdays around midnight. And I probably wouldn't have done it today because I'm feeling a little bit poorly, so I'm going to have to stay off camera. But I had promised my good friend, games designer Dana Lombardy, that he could come on and talk about his latest Kickstarter project, which got funded in an unbelievably short period of time. We're going to have a quick look at that before. Now, this is a classic board game called One-Page Bulge, which was actually for sale in the very first wargame store that I used to go to back in the day, Games Castle in Kingston upon Thames. And I remember seeing this game and I thought, a one-page Bulge, Battle of the Bulge game, 1 page of rules, how good can it be? But it was a very popular game. People liked it because it was fast, it was quick. You could set it up and get going. Now, it's been repackaged, reproduced with modern graphics and all the bells and whistles that you would expect. Let's have a quick look at the crowdfunding campaign.
I would like to know more about the cover and the artist.
A good friend of mine who is a comic book artist and also an illustrator, historical illustrator. So it's not like superhero art. It's also historical, but it's done in that kind of illustrative style. And he did the cover for One-Page Bulge #2. And I have a sample of the art, which I will post in this this interview, and we also will have it up on the landing page at lombardystudios.com, where people can take a look at it. We also have some sample artwork. I mentioned that NATO symbols will be available, but on a much bigger counter. And then there'll also be a version where people who are interested in using the historical insignia for the Germans and the Americans, they can use that instead of or in place of the NATO symbols. And then we're talking about cards, using cards that will have scenes of things like the bazookas or the German panther and tiger, and how those help tell the story. And those cards will have effects such as die roll modifiers, or they will cause problems with movement, things like that. And there's one more thing besides the counters, is that I'm looking at tokens, which would be circular counters, which would be for destroyed bridges or roadblocks and things like that. That immediately you can tell it's not the traditional square counter because of its shape, and you know therefore that counter is a different type of informational counter.
Yes.
Okay, so let's hold that there. So that's Steve Jackson, who designed the original game, who for some reason is sitting in a very short seat. I'm not quite sure why. But let's bring in Dana. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Great to have you back. Yeah, I don't know why Steve is slumped in this chair during the. He looks very low down compared to you, but this is amazing. So this went live how long ago?
2 weeks.
And in 40 minutes, you'd hit your goal.
Yes.
And your original goal was about £1,500, if I read that correctly. You're now at 24,000. I mean, I could make a movie for that money.
Maybe we should.
I could make a movie for that money. I should do a Dana Lombardy Presents feature film. Maybe incorporate some kind of board game element into it, because it's notoriously difficult to raise money for films on Kickstarter now. This is what I remembered. Steve Jackson did a series of, I think there was a name for these. They were called something like pocket case games.
Pocket box
games, right? And we may have called them pocket case games in the UK, but pocket box games. They were almost like a tape cassette box, which sort of clipped together with two little latches on the side. And I think there was a version of Car Wars that came like this, which was also designed by Steve. You had the Illuminati board game, and this was One-Page Bulge, which was probably the only game of Steve's that's never passed through my hands. It's the only one that I never owned, which is unusual for me because I normally like kind of World War II simple games, but I had just got the Avalon Hill Battle of the Bulge game, the one with Patton on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably felt at the time I didn't need a second one. But yeah, so this is the original with lots of blue counters for the Germans, I think.
I think he had very limited color choices. Remember, this is 1980.
Yeah.
So I think 2 colors. They had black and they had blue, but we've obviously got a much bigger palette now. Here we are in 2024,
Yeah.
40 some years later.
And the counters are 3/4 inch die cut
Yes.
counters. So these are American, which are kind of, if a counter is full strength, it's khaki, you flip it over for half strength, I'm
Yes,
guessing.
exactly.
And yeah, the various the German units. I don't know what color would you call that, field gray? I guess it's field gray.
Yeah, it's basically a field gray, and the American is like, it's just another form of khaki or olive green, which again, as soon as they got out in the weather, as soon as that happened, everything faded, and then people just picked up different clothing and got reissued new stuff. So whatever color you think it should be, that's what we're going to have.
Yeah, I mean, actually, by the time the Germans committed the Ardennes offensive, their units were wearing an awful hodgepodge of all kinds of different
Absolutely
uniforms and kit, and kind of extrapolated from wherever they could get it from.
And the Americans didn't have white camouflage available, so they literally stripped the bed sheets off of abandoned homes and things, and they would ad hoc make something out of it to wrap over themselves or their helmets, at least.
Like a white sort of white poncho.
Yeah, exactly.
Homemade poncho, effectively.
Exactly.
So for me, when I'm buying a new game, I always want to see the map. Is the map not on here?
No, the map is not yet there. What I'm doing is the map that Steve did originally included the setup positions for the Germans. And what I realized is, well, you don't need that. In other words, the Germans enter on one edge of the map, which means you can do the historical setup, and they would come in at different locations on one end of the map. And then once you get rid of that, once the Germans move beyond that, the Americans never entered in that area. So it's really a unnecessary part of the historical area that we didn't need to show. And because the Germans really didn't cross much of, I think, got close to the Meuse River, but not ever crossed it. You don't need to have a whole area from there to Antwerp, which was their original goal, because if they don't make it to the Meuse River, there is not going to be any possible victory for the Germans.
Yeah, most Bulge games, usually the victory conditions for the Germans are usually sort of derived from X number of units over the Meuse River by a certain turn.
Yes.
And then there's usually kind of secondary objectives, destruction of American units, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is infamous for the fact that it's got one page of rules. I mean, is it double-sided? Is that technically two-sided?
Yeah, it is. And it's not technically, therefore, it's not one page because it's one sheet, two-sided.
Right.
But that's what he was aiming for, that because there was a challenge that was published in Moves magazine back then in 78, 79, that basically said, can't we have simpler games instead of 48-page rule books? I mean, this is just crazy. This is an attempt not only to show that it is possible to make an interesting and accurate war game by not having a lot of rules. Plus, it's a great crossover game for people that they may play other games, but they may have never played a historical game. And giving somebody like that a 48-page rule book is a non-starter. No one in his right mind is going to do that if they never played a war game before.
Well, yeah, you don't want to start off with Richard Berg's campaign for North Africa, do you? Really?
Oh my gosh! Yes, exactly.
I'm not sure I know anyone who's ever completed that game. And that, of course, it appears in that TV show. I forget the name of it now, where you know, the nerds set it up because
Yes.
one of them's bought it off the internet and said, I bought the most complicated game ever. And when that came out, I was thinking, oh my god, yeah, I remember owning that once, but never even opening the box. It kind of passed through my hands quite briefly. But yeah, so I mean, this has done pretty well. How many backers have there been?
So far, was it say 300 and something through 323? So that's really good for actually we're more closer to 3 weeks than 2. I'm sorry, we're up to 3 weeks. We have 1 week left, which is why I really am grateful for you to publicize this in case people want to jump on
Yeah,
here
sure.
at the end and pledge.
So it's ideal for solo play. People can play it at home. So let's
Mhm.
just look at the perks here. You can get just the book. So the book is this new kind of book that you guys have made.
Yeah, it's a comic book. In other words, if people look at it, they'll recognize it as a U.S. style comic book, but it's not really a graphic novel. No superheroes, nothing fictional. It's all about having scenes like you see here, where the Americans are defending a destroyed building in the snowy covered Ardennes.
Yeah,
So
graphic interpretations of different historical
yes,
sections of battle, I would imagine.
exactly.
Yeah. And then the second perk is for $65, they get just the game with NATO counters.
Hmm.
So does the game come in the sort of the clip box like before, or is it in a different type of box?
No. It's going to be basically a 9 by 9 box. It's a square box,
Right.
and we're sensitive about how much room we're going to have on a shelf. I know that in the United States we have these bookshelf-sized books or
Mm,
games.
yeah.
What we're doing is a 9 by 9, and the map board is going to be 18 by 18. So it's a mounted map board, a heavy cardboard
Oh,
color
nice.
map. And when you pull it out, it unfolds, and it is an 18 by 18 sheet.
I'm just got my tape measure here actually. So, okay, yeah. So I see that's 18 by 18. You could even maybe play that on a British train, possibly. Might be a bit big. If you get one of the big tables with 4 chairs around it, you might be able to play that on the train. So that's yeah, because the original map was not cardboard mounted.
No. It's just a piece of paper, and it was designed in the United States. The schools, and the reason it was called a pocket box, Amy, is you literally could put it in your pocket, your jacket pocket, or even your pants pocket. And it went to a lot of young people, and was designed for anyone from I guess high school or junior high and college age that wanted to play something easy, fast. But they didn't have a lot of money. These games back then were like $3-4. They were not mounted game maps. The graphics were awful. Even Steve Jackson says that he was able to do things with the early style. What do they call it? Press-on letters,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
graphics. And this is much more sophisticated. But Steve is involved at every level of this, and nothing gets printed or done without his okay. So back then, it was a very popular game, along with Illuminati and Car Wars and Ogre. All those games that he designed were amazing, and that built up his reputation. But yeah, everything since then, there are the deluxe Car Wars, deluxe Ogre. These are much bigger boxes, much bigger games in terms of the components, the maps, the number of colors. They're much more sophisticated, and that's what his intention was with this as well.
I've got. In fact, I think it's on the shelf behind me. I've got Ogre. Oh no, it must be in the other room. But I have Ogre. One of the versions of Ogre. I know there's a version of Ogre that comes with like metal miniatures.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that's not the one I've got. But I remember the original Ogre board game, and that was another one that was pretty popular.
Oh yeah.
For anyone who's not completely familiar with Steve Jackson's repertoire of games, I'm going to put the link in the chat for the for his website, and I'll also put Dana's in there. Yeah, good to see you, Wormy Spoons. How you doing? So obviously the link for the Kickstarter and everything is below. But I'll put these links in so people can get them easily. Yeah. So whose idea was it to bring this out again? Was this something Steve brought to you, or was it your plan?
No, actually, Steve was very busy with several other things. I mean, his most popular games right now are Munchkin, which is a card game. He has a lot of licenses like Star Trek Munchkin, Lord of the Rings Munchkin, and so forth. And one thing I want to tell you about Illuminati, one of his first games, it was a card game. It was a tabletop, but not a board game. There was no board. It was just cards, and it was hilarious. It was one of the incredibly satirical games that people really loved. It included you are a secret society or organization that are trying to take over like American political parties and industry and things like that in order to you run the world, not the things that people see. So the Illuminati are doing everything.
Right. Yeah, I've never played a game of Illuminati. I always wanted to sit down and play it. But
anyway, so he didn't come to me and say, "Hey, we got to do this." What happened was, you remember when you interviewed me over the summer, we were doing the D-Day 80th anniversary, and that went well. We were very happy with that. And I immediately thought, well, why don't we do the other 80th anniversaries of the major battles that we can get something out? And I was talking with a friend of mine who was the author and researcher for the Omaha Beach book and game. And he said, why do you need to invent a new game? Why don't you just get One-Page Bulge and talk to Steve Jackson? It was like, oh my God, I totally forgot that. So I immediately contacted Steve after we finished the project on D-Day. And he was like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't have time to do anything more than, help you with it and look over your shoulder. But because I've got, this company and we got all kinds of other projects that are coming out for the fall. And I said, well, you don't have to do anything. I've got people who just finished doing the D-Day, the Bloody Omaha thing, and we can do the same thing for One-Page Bulge. And he said, well, you know what, let's just do it.
Well, it's done incredibly well. Let's have a quick look at, for those people who don't know what Munchkin is, which is a pretty big IP in the gaming world. This is Munchkin. This is Steve Jackson's website, who's collaborating with Dana on this, and these are kind of the different sort of Munchkin card sets you can get, and other products, of course. And there's a good guide here of how to sort of get into which game you should play first and so on. But we've got a big anniversary of the Bulge coming up pretty soon, right?
Yes, it started on the 16th of December and it went through the end of January. But really, honestly, the December battles were the most important. The Germans had to get a certain distance. They wanted to get over the Moisette River at least, but that didn't happen. And at that point, also Patton, with his Fourth Army, was able to move a bunch of divisions up and relieve the siege of Bastogne, where American forces were encircled. And once they broke that siege, the Germans knew it was over, and then they started running back as fast as they could with their panzer divisions, because they were also getting pressure at different areas of the front, because once the Allies knew that most of the German divisions were armored divisions were there, they started hitting the flanks, and so they withdrew them, and that was the end of the Bulge. But the Allies, and that included the British, who were able to send troops down to basically counterattack. All that happened at that point is the German panzers withdrew as fast as they could. The infantry slowly withdrew, and there really wasn't much of a battle except pushing, with the Americans and the British pushing the Germans back and eliminating the Bulge. So honestly, and the game only lasts until the end of December, because at that point the Germans haven't made it. They're not going to.
How long is it? How long does a game typically take to play?
You mean how many hours is it, Kate, to play?
Yeah, from setup to conclusion, what's the kind of typical running time for the game?
I would say that the original game was about 2 hours, maybe. No, it wasn't a lot because there weren't that many counters to use, and there wasn't a lot of uh, steps in each turn. It was designed to be as simple as possible, but still give you the flavor of the attempt of the Germans to break through and the Americans slowing them, then stopping them, and then just before they counterattack, that was when it was all over. But we're trying to match the simplicity. We're trying to match the ease of play, as well as adding, even with the cards being added, that doesn't add a lot of extra time because we also are not having every last German unit. There were a lot of units on the flanks, but they didn't do anything. Once they got into position, all the action was really in the middle. I think from Bastogne to Clairvaux and then on to Saint-Vit. So there was a shoulder on both sides that the Germans had put infantry divisions in, and they were not really trying to move forward. They were just trying to protect the I guess you'd call it the alley through Belgium that the Germans needed to use for their mobile units.
So, in terms of you've obviously gone over the original target. There's one unlocked stretch goal here, which is a special and 80th anniversary decal sticker
Yes.
for everyone. Are you planning any other extra features as you've gone sort of way past maybe what you anticipated?
I don't think we want to do a lot more stuff because it not only adds expense to the game. We have different counters. Obviously, we have NATO and we have historical, but other than the cards, we aren't going to have like custom made dice or anything like that. I don't think it would add that much to the play of the game. And really, the only thing that we're going to do, because we have like 2 sets of counters. Somebody said, why don't you do a double blind version where you've got rules and you have basically a screen and people could buy a second map if they wanted to, and they could do a double blind series where there's hidden movement. In other words, there would be a third person.
I remember the company. I think it was GDW.
Yes. Yep.
And I remember they brought out, it's probably the early 80s, 82 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
They brought out 3 double blind games. One of them was Market Garden, one of them was D-Day.
Yep.
I think there might have been a Bulge one, but there was definitely a D-Day and a Market Garden one because I used to own both of them, and I still have the Market Garden one in the shed, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was quite a good system. I mean, I always remember thinking it wasn't that difficult to work out what was where because the map wasn't very big, and certain units were always going to be in certain places, especially in the market.
And this should be even easier. I mean, honestly, the counters are bigger, much bigger than a ½ inch, and the hexes therefore have to be bigger as well. So we're going to not have to modify the movement points on each counter because you'll still be able to move as far terrain-wise, historically, but there's no reason to have big numbers when you have bigger hexes. In other words, the same area that we've got in the original game with getting rid of the German setup position, you can now have fewer hexes represent the same terrain.
So, while we're here, my understanding is that there's a Streets of Stalingrad Reborn project
Yes.
in the mix. Is that what can you tell us a bit more about that? I know there's I've got a shot of some artwork here. Do like looking at maps, and obviously this is a different scale to the, or is this a strategic map of the city and then you go into a bigger scale on top of this, or?
No. What happens is the original game was 300 meters a hex, so it was like an 8-foot long map, 2 pieces that ended up being a total of 8 feet. And it was huge. It was a monster game in the truest sense of the word. It came out in 1979. 2 more editions came out up till I think 2001. And this one is what I really didn't like. What you just said earlier, that was a frustration for me, is that like Campaign for North Africa, almost nobody played it. I mean, they
Right.
collected it, but for me as a designer, if people buy my game and then they don't play it, this is really disappointing because I put a lot in it, not just the graphics, not just the research, but I wanted people to play it. So what this version of Streets of Stalingrad is basically going to be like 1/3 this size
Right.
of the map of the original game. And it will include cards that you can choose for your operational attacks. It'll also have counters that have different types of units. Originally, they were meant to be companies and platoons for tanks and battalions for the field artillery in my original game. This one has card effects are going to be the artillery, and then you're going to have basically regiments for the Germans, mostly brigades. Same thing for the Soviet units. So you've got a bigger unit than a company, obviously, much bigger. And then you've got basically armor and anti-aircraft and engineers. Those become add-ons. In other words, they basically augment the infantry.
Yeah, I understand.
So that's the intention. So you've got interesting choices with the cards. And then you've got other factors you can put in with, you don't know what's under the Germans. In other words, you see the infantry, and surprisingly, both sides were able to figure out the higher level units, the divisions, the brigades, the regiments, and where they were. Because after a couple of days, that became obvious, either through prisoners or because of radio interception and so forth. And this same thing, you're going to be able to see the regiment, the brigade for the Soviets, but you don't know what's under it. You don't know what kind of units are attached, whether it's Sturmgeschütz or whether it's Panzers or T-34s or special assault units. And the Russians did a lot of that with PPSH units that armed with the submachine guns that were basically fire brigades, where the Germans were attacked because they had no idea where the Germans were going to attack, except once in a while they were able to figure out where the concentrations of the infantry were and were able to disrupt it. But in general, you've got a sort of hidden movement with what's attached to the infantry before you launch your attack, and certainly they'll never know what you've got in your cards.
I was at Consim, well, the great convention, Phoenix Games convention, run by our mutual lovely friend John Krantz, which is actually how the two of us met originally. And the year that the original L2 version launched, which is this one, that was the one time when I saw there were 3 of them set up side by side. This is the size of that's one small section of the map. The benefit of those people watching for the gargantuan version.
Yes.
And I think we talked about it when you came on last time. I used to own the West End Games version that came in 2 boxes before this, Fire on the Volga and Battle for the Factories, I think it was called.
Yes, that was Nova Games. Nova
Games, sorry. Yeah, I had those 2. I got bought that for my birthday, and I remember desperately trying to fit the whole thing onto the table that I had in my bedroom, which was really not sufficient. Eventually, my dad was, had to build me a War Games table, which I was very pleased about. But yeah, these are all the counters. So what you're basically talking about is a scaled down version of this that is more manageable, still has quite a lot of bells and whistles and chrome and whatnot.
Yes.
Which is going to be more enjoyable for players and something that people can set up much more easily at conventions. And by the end of the convention week, they won't have just moved 2 hexes with all their counters, which is it's nothing more distressing than seeing a 9-map Battle of the Bulge game set up at convention and me coming back a week later when these 8 guys have been playing it all week, and the line has moved about 2 hexes in that time. Which, as much as I'd love to play a big Battle of the Bulge game, I'd like to play one that moves a bit faster than that. So this sounds like a good. You're going to Kickstarter this as well, I would imagine.
Yes, and then it'll be next year. What we're going to do is we're going to get past the 40th anniversaries of the big battles in World War II. And obviously the Germans surrendered in Europe in May of 1945, which is next year's 80th anniversary. But there is one big game, well, not big in terms of like a monster game, but there is one big battle that Steve Jackson and I actually had done together in Fire and Movement magazine when Steve owned it briefly in the 80s. And in 1989, he came out with Fire and Movement magazine that had a game in it, which before that it did not. And the game, which I was able to put together with him, was Kamikaze. And it was based on all the kamikaze suicide aircraft attacks on the American fleet off Okinawa and Iwo Jima.
I remember the cover for that issue.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So we're going to do an 80th anniversary, which Okinawa is from April through June of 1945. So we're going to have the Kickstarter next year in the spring, and it will be Kamikaze, second edition.
Okay, that sounds like an interesting game. So in terms of, obviously now, based on the success of One-Page Bulge, it seems like you've got a pretty established following. So what you're really doing with the Kickstarter, with the games now, is what we used to do with the P500, minimum 500 games ordered.
Yep.
Work out the costs, and then, the game goes ahead when the minimum orders have come in. This is effectively the same thing, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. The Kickstarter it's P500 works really well for the guys at what went out of my head at not GDW. It's
MMP.
No, not
GMT.
GMT. Boy.
Yeah, Mark Simonich and co.
Yep, and Roger McGowan did the cover.
Roger McGowan. And,
yep.
And the other guy whose name I keep forgetting.
Yes. Those guys.
Yeah. I've stayed at Mark's house. Please invite me again, Mark. I will.
Yes.
Yeah. So funny because his house is packed full of GMT games, and he's like, "Let's play a game," and I'm like, "Great!" And I'm looking at all these games. I'm like, "Oh, I quite fancy this one." Yeah, I don't want to play any of the games with my name on. So that rules out like about 65% of the games on the shelf that I've been looking at that I'm quite excited over that Mark now doesn't want to play because he's play tested them to death, I suppose. Mm-hmm. I think also he probably would just whip my ass, But yeah, that's quite funny. So Gene is the other guy.
Gene, yes, Billingsley.
Gene. Yeah, how could I forget?
Yep.
Yeah, so the P500 works well for them, but this works better for you because
I wanted to say something before I answer that. Is that
sure.
When you said that the designer will kick your ass, it's like actually I have found, including in my case, I'm a terrible player because I already have preconceived notions about how the battle went, and I tend to sort of drift into that because I've studied it so much, rather than look at how can I minimax this situation so I win, because I didn't, as a designer, I thought it was perfect, of course, and then it's like all of a sudden somebody just kicks my ass because, well, the rules say this, and that's what I'm doing, and it's like, oh, I can't believe I left a huge hole like that to let you literally win the game on a trick, So
here's a great question from Keith, who's one of my moderators who's watching. Are you finding younger people are still interested in this as history?
It's a yes and a no on that. No, at least in the United States, public schools are not teaching history. They aren't. They're just not doing it. And this is not just military history. It's the fact that just about anything about history, there are other issues, other basic goals that they want to achieve with teaching kids. But we have homeschooling now over here, much larger than in the past. We also have charter schools, which are basically still public schools, but they do a lot deeper dive into things. And if you want to put up that comic book again, what I could tell you is
Sure.
I have a really good story about what happened with that. No, that's the game box. So
Oh.
where is the, there it is.
Here we
There
go.
it is. Okay. So what happened is that if you remember, when we did the D-Day book, there was a hardcover book, but we also did a comic book style book that was basically it was a comic book, but we didn't call it that. It was an illustrated history, and it had fewer pages, but it was done all illustrations, not a lot of text. And here's what happened. This is why I'm so excited about not only this Battle of the Bulge illustrated history, the illustrated story of the Battle of the Bulge, but also I am already developing a lot more historical stuff, including specific units like the Tuskegee Airmen, for example, the American group of black pilots who
Sure.
fought World War II. So,
Yeah.
and here's how this came up. I went to a conference in Florida where they did a World War II conference and had speakers, and it was really wonderful. And a gentleman who was sitting right next to me, and we were listening to this stuff together, and he said, "What do you do?" And so I showed him the copy of the Bloody Omaha comic book. And he was like, "Wow, this is fantastic. I believe in these a lot." And I said, "What do you mean you believe it? This is my first one." It's like, what are you referring to? Well, he was a docent at the World War II Museum in New Orleans, but he also has been a docent at other historical locations, including where Harriet Tubman, who was the freed slave, that basically saved at least 700 slaves
Yeah, she
out
was involved in the Underground Railroad.
the Underground Railroad, and her house in Upper New York is now a museum. And so he was a docent there, and he was looking to take people on tours, explain the background and the history, and a lot of young groups, a lot of students came in. And so he was sitting there. He says, "Okay, who can tell me who she was? Who can tell me what she did?" And they all raised their hands. And he was like, this went on, and he's like, "Wait a minute. I know you're not taught this in your school, so how do you know all this?" And they said, "The comic book." They all had a comic book on Harriet Tubman, and he is absolutely a hard believer now in terms of comic books like this, even though we don't call them comics, are the best way to basically put something in the hands of somebody who doesn't have $40 to spend on a book, and doesn't have time or is not interested in reading a 400 page hardcover book. So these are the introduction to important history, important battles, and we're going to do it for Kamikaze. We're going to do it for other historical periods. And I am now, even though I still do hardcover books, these are the things that we are going to focus on. And I'm working with this gentleman who started a new chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen there in Louisiana. So I'm working with people to try and get history put into these where it's mostly imageries, illustrations, maps, and in details. Enough details that it's not just a general overview, but it's also not like, this is why Churchill said this to Stalin. It's like, no, that's not the kind of history we've got in these comics.
Right. Yeah, Wormy Spoons was saying there was a pretty decent movie about Harriet Tubman. I think it was out in 2019. I saw that. I thought it was good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I did like that. Also, there's a good film about the Tuskegee Airmen. If you go way back, that one was made by HBO in the early 2000s. Much better than the Red Tails movie that came out later, which was just quite dreadful.
And to answer you, I can't remember the gentleman's name who put down a question about the history. One of the things that got me really excited recently is as I said, we did a comic book style book on Bloody Omaha for the
Oh,
D-Day
that, yeah,
invasion.
yeah.
And we, obviously we're trying to go out in the regular channels, regular distribution. But one of the museums near Keith Rocco, the artist who did the murals on Bloody Omaha, it's the 29th Infantry Division, which invaded Omaha alongside the 1st Infantry Division, Big Red One.
Yeah.
And they wanted to get these comics. And they went through 700 of them in one weekend with the kids who came in, because they didn't sell them. They literally wanted the comics because they're not that expensive. They bought enough comics. They literally gave them to every child. Well, every student. I don't want to say they're all children, but every student that came in for that weekend got a copy. So it meant, unlike a movie, and I'm not dissing movies, but when you
Yeah.
get out of the movie, unless you've got something in your hand or it motivates you to go into a bookstore or something, or maybe look it up online. Usually it's like, that was entertainment. I loved it a lot. It was really interesting. I didn't know that. And that's, you lost them because they never have something to look at. What we're trying to do with these comic size books is to give them to people, as many students and people who just aren't even students, but in their 30s, 40s, 50s, if they don't know about this, and they start off with something that, oh, this is easy to read, this is easy to understand, and that's what I'm personally really excited about it, as you can tell. And the fact that we can get these museums and individuals who just say, you know what, I'm going to give this to the homeschool in my state.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great way of getting people interested in the history again. If it can happen through comics, then
Yes.
why not? Of course, Sergeant Rock back in the day.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Talking of the D-Day game, how well did the Kickstarter for that finish off? Because it was still going when I spoke to you last. What were the final results with that? Were you
I
happy?
mean, we definitely funded, but nothing like what we did with the Bulge. And I have I don't have absolute proof of this, but I think what happened is this past summer was pretty dismal. People were in the middle of the inflation. They were frightened about, the planet looked like it was going to be in World War III soon. And it looked like, what's going to happen? It was uncertainty everywhere. And I asked some
Yeah.
people at Consim World, where you and I first met, and I asked them, I said, I didn't get you didn't support my Kickstarter on Bloody Omaha on D-Day. And they said, we're not spending any money except on the kids or the grandkids. That's it. We can barely keep our head above water on rent, mortgage, utilities, food, gasoline. That's all we've got. We're hoarding everything else. We're not going to buy any discretionary income type items, like, I don't need another game right now. I'll wait when it comes out in a few months, when we finally get the elections settled, when we see whether inflation is going to continue like this. And so they were just not in the mood to buy. And so what was very heartening for me is that this campaign really got us back on the track of what we've done in the past with previous Kickstarters.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, that was a very uncertain time. I suppose also the other thing is with this One-Page Bulge was quite an iconic game, so there was probably a core fan base that were like, oh yeah, I quite fancy that.
Yeah.
So that you were able to draw on. Thank God, they're still around, because the game, we're going back a fair way. So but I think that probably helped.
Absolutely. Which is why Steve and I want to do Kamikaze. And if we don't do it now, I don't know when we're ever going to do it. And it's very appropriate because it's 80th anniversary of the Battle of Okinawa and Iwo Jima, the last battles in the Pacific.
Yeah, no, I think that will probably go down quite well. Fantastic. So people you can still back this game. You can still get it. The links are all below. I've put them in the chat as well. Question from Keith. I'm sure he does, but does he get errors or clarification questions from the players? Errata. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's been 40 some years, and a couple of people still had some questions about the original game. And so those questions came in, and Steve answered them. They just were clarifications. This is what I meant by that. This is my interpretation, because you could have read this rule two different ways. It wasn't that they didn't understand it at all. It was just that, do you mean this way or that way? And so, yes, I mean, even 40 some years later, Steve got some questions from the people who were supporting this one-page bulge, and he answered it.
Yeah, because it would be quite funny if one-page bulge had 5 pages of errata.
Yes, exactly. Well, we don't want that, which is why the original game, we're not trying to change it. We're augmenting it with playing cards, and we're making the counters and the map symbols bigger, because as Steve said it when he wrote to all of his fans that follow, and it's just like me, I can't read this, the small type, the tiny numbers and the tiny rules, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
It was not going to be one page, and it never was really one page. It was 2 sides of one sheet. But yeah, it's probably going to be a 4-page booklet with big type, big text, so we can read it.
Yeah, well, I think that's very wise, because none of our eyes are getting any younger.
Exactly.
So, fantastic. Is there, before we wrap up, would you say I think you've done 7 Kickstarters now, is that right?
Yeah, this one is the 7th Kickstarter.
What would you say is the most valuable lesson you've learned as a creator where running and managing a Kickstarter campaign and making it successful is concerned?
Staying in touch with the people who've already pledged keeps them excited and helps bring in more people. And so always doing as many different posts on different things, and interacting with the people who pledged, and getting out to every person of any type of YouTube channel, any influencers, anything like that, no matter how small. A couple of thousand people is just as good as 12,000 people who are subscribers on a YouTube channel. And we did more of that. And with Steve's help, his thousands of people, we were able to reach far more people. And that I'm going to continue with Steve. And there are several other people that I'm going to do things with in the future that I think really made a difference, why we were able to fund this one in 40 minutes and why we're having the success we are.
Well, fantastic. Last time when you came on, I was at 3,500 subscribers. Now I'm just a few hundred away from 5,000.
Wow, that's great. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. So the channel is slowly getting there, and that's partly thanks to wonderful guests like yourself. I had Gail Ann Hurd on a couple of weeks ago, who has produced a few big films in her day, like Terminator and Terminator 2 and The Abyss and Aliens and so forth. And she's currently doing the Walking Dead franchise. So she was great, fantastic guest. And then today I had Jeffrey Byron, who is the son of actress Anna Lee, who was a big Hollywood starlet. You might remember that she was the blonde heroine in the original King Solomon's Mines film. I'm not talking about the crap one with Sharon Stone. I'm talking about the good one that came out in 1937.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
that was Jeffrey Byron's mum, and his godfather was John Ford. So his first job was on the Emerald Coast with John Wayne and Lee Marvin. So we were talking about that earlier today. So I've had some incredible guests, each with their own sort of unique creative history, just like yourself. And guys, if you want to see more about the kind of things that Dana's got up to, this is the Lombardy Studios website. The information is already below. You can read about other projects and things going on. There's all kinds of stuff here. I think also most of your games can be ordered direct from this website. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
So One-Page Bulge is live for another 7 days. So if you want to get hold of a copy, order one now. I assume going forward, though, that there probably will be some availability of it after the campaign is closed. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the Kickstarter is to help us raise the money to actually publish the game, but you don't have to do that. I mean, pledging, I love it. I really, thank all the people that do that for us. But the bottom line is there will be games after this. We're not just going to publish 323 games. There are going to be more available, and they will be available after this one is published, which we hope to start shipping in January after the holidays.
And the other way people can help you, of course, is if, we know times are tight. If you can't afford to purchase the game, or maybe the game's not your bag, but you might know somebody else who it is, you can direct them to the campaign. Or if you've got a bit of social media following and you can spare 20 seconds, just do a quick post about it.
Yes,
these
absolutely.
kinds of things always help, and one day you may well have a project of your own to promote. In fact, you may even be getting in touch with me on here. So don't forget to promote the work of other artists, because it all comes back to you. It's a karma thing. We all help each other out.
Absolutely.
Life is just a little bit easier for all of us. Fantastic. All right. Well, Dana, thanks very much for coming on. We're coming up to the hour, so I'll start to wrap it up there. Have you got anything final you wanted to say?
Just to you, Lance, I'm so grateful that I'm on this creative channel with you, and I'm going to do everything I can to help promote what you're doing. The Outcast Creative is unique in the fact that you love games at the same time that you're dealing with some really big producers, directors, and people in the industry. I'm fascinated with that, and I'm going to encourage everybody I know to come on, take a look at some of the things that you've already done in the past. You gave me the link to this one, but do you have a link to your? Is it? This is not YouTube. This is something else, right?
Well, no. I mean, we're currently on YouTube. The main link for the channel, if people want to just kind of scroll through the content as a whole, is literally the Outcast Creative on YouTube. That will take you to the main menu.
Okay.
In fact, I'll get that up quickly so we can have a quick look before we go. And it'll. Oh, hang on. I'm still sharing my screen. Am I? Let me just stop that for a second. Yeah. So, and on that menu page, there are various playlists.
Okay.
So the playlist that will
there. I'll send everyone I know to your page so that they can take a look at it, and they may have something that you've done or you interviewed somebody. It's like, oh, I really would like to hear that one. So I will push the Outcast Creative. Like I said, karma it really works. It exists, and I believe in it. And I'm going to do everything I can, Lance, to help you.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was really big help earlier in the summer was I was on my friend's YouTube channel as a live stream, and he's got a very big following, and they actually gave me a chance to sort of pitch to everybody watching. There was about 15,000 people watching.
Mm-hmm.
What was the purpose of the channel? And I said, well, it's to support independent creative people. I mean, yeah, we do film reviews and stuff like that, like most people do, but the backbone of the channel is the industry interviews. And the idea is to get big guests on, and the big guests also support the little guests. And
right.
And I put a call out there, and then I said, if you're a board games designer, if you're writing a book, you got a book out on Amazon that you've just published, and you want a bit of help pushing it out, or you're a musician, or you might be a DJ or a promoter who's involved in music events, or an actor trying to make their short film, director, low budget film, so on and so on. Of course, so we do a lot of that stuff. Get in touch with me, and 6 people did. 6 people got in touch with me within 24 hours, and I've had all of them on the channel.
Great.
Since then. I've had them all on. Had 2 authors come on together to promote 2 sort of fantasy genre books, and I think we had a couple of filmmakers. And next week I got an extremely busy week. Next week I've got less than 4 interviews lined up.
Wow.
From right across the board, very different people. We have an independent screenwriter and filmmaker coming in, who's, I would say, is relatively young in terms of where she's at with her career. And then another person I have coming in is a guy called Junior Tomlin. And he's this artist from back in the day who's done all this fantastic cover art. And he used to do a lot of stuff in the music industry, but he also used to work on comics and like 2000 AD.
Mm-hmm.
So this is some of his stuff here. I met him when he was manning his stall at an event I went to recently where he was showing off a load of his art. So he's coming on because I said, yeah, I'd love to interview you, talk to you about your career. He's had a fantastic career. The independent screenwriter and producer is Damari Dowie. She's coming on next week as well. Then I have, you're going to love this, I have the godfather of British comics coming on, Pat Mills. So Pat Mills is one of the originators of Judge Dredd.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, he's a massive sort of icon in I mean, he was not just Judge Dredd, but he also was involved in the creation of a lot of the early sort of British boys historical comics. So things like Battle Action, you know, Charlie's War, where they did these very famous kind of World War One and World War Two strips.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a lot of stuff like that coming on, and he's still going strong. He's got he's got a project out, a new comic that's coming out that's Kickstarter. I think it's more of a graphic novel, but I'll let him explain it when he comes. But yeah, Pat Mills is the godfather of British comics. He's with me next Friday, so next week is a pretty exciting week for interviews. And then I've also got on, I think it's on the Thursday, I have 2 female DJs who have sort of been smashing the scene over here in nightclubs. So I've literally got people from every different creative discipline next week. I've got, you know, people that work in comics, people that work in music, people that work in film production. And that's what I love about the channel. We will cover anything creative and support those creative people. So Adele and Daya, who's really big DJ on the trance music scene in London, and Charmin Love, who's an emerging DJ from Brighton. I've got the 2 of them on, and it's quite nice to have quite an experienced guest coming on with someone who's just starting out. I think that would be a very interesting back and forth.
Oh yeah, that sounds fantastic.
So I should get you on with a young games designer sometime in a similar fashion, you know.
I'd love to. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, Lance. And any way I can help you and help your guests, I will do it.
Well, Keith says, make sure you come back. Great guest. And yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to wrap it up there, not least of which is because I have a terrible cold and I probably should get to bed as it's getting a bit late over here. But Dana, thanks very much for coming in again. Really do appreciate it. Best of luck with the campaign. All the information is below. Did you know that our channel now has its own song?
I heard something at the beginning, yeah.
Well, this is the full-length version of it now, so you can get to see it before we sign off.
Misfits and dreamers getting innovative. It's film, TV, and theater in the mix. Industry interviews where ideas get their fix. He's creative, we're creative. How about you? Share your passion, join the crew. At Outcast Creative, we're breaking through. Hang with Lance and the Outcast crew. Hang with Lance and the Outcast crew. Interviews with fellow artists on the rise and reviews that might surprise. Films, TV shows from back in the day. You might just find a hidden gem today. He's creative, we're creative. How about you? Share your passion, join the crew. At Outcast Creative, we're breaking through. Hang with Lance and the Outcast crew. Hang with Lance and the Outcast crew. stand up proud. Actors, musicians, board game designers, be loud. At Outcast Creative, amazing's the word. He even interviewed the legend, Galen Hurd. He's creative, we're creative. How about you? Share your passion, join the crew. At Outcast Creative, we're breaking through. Hang with Lance and the Outcast crew. Hang with Lance and the Outcast crew. So come along, take a chance. Join the Outcast, hang with Lance. Bring your vision, your art, your flair. At Outcast Creative, there's always room to share. Hang with Lance and the Outcast crew.